let me set a scene for you. You're 7 miles up, flying over the pitch-black Atlantic Ocean. And then, that constant, reassuring hum of the jet engines, it just stops. It's replaced by a really terrifying silence. This wasn't some nightmare. This was the reality for 306 people on Air Transat Flight 236.
Yep, on board a 200-ton Airbus A330 with 306 souls, they now had 2 completely dead engines, absolutely zero power. The plane had become a giant, heavy glider. So the question becomes, how in the world do you land a 200-ton glider in the middle of the ocean in the dead of night when you've only got one shot to get it right? Well, the answer to that really begins with understanding how it all went so wrong in the first place. So let's dive right into the heart of the crisis. This is part 1, glider over the Atlantic. Okay, so at 6:26 a.m. Universal Time, that second and final engine flames out. Its fire just goes out. And with it, the main electrical generators shut down. The cabin lights flicker, and then they just die, plunging all the passengers into total darkness. The only thing louder than the wind rushing past the plane was the deafening silence where the engines were supposed to be. Inside that dark cabin, you can just imagine the panic. A 57-year-old man found himself thinking of his daughters back home in Canada. A terrified flight attendant actually walked up to a passenger and pleaded, "Please help me." One couple, refusing to give up, started making plans for how they would swim to shore after the crash. And for so many others, all that was left to do was pray. The crew started preparing everyone for what seemed inevitable, a water ditching. Now, that's the official term for a controlled emergency landing on water. And let me tell you, it is one of the most dangerous things a pilot can ever attempt. Most people might survive the initial impact, but in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic, the survival rate just plummets because of drowning and hypothermia. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a sudden, random failure. This disaster was actually set in motion 9 whole days earlier, all because of a mistake that measured just a few millimeters. And that brings us to part 2, a ticking time bomb. The whole problem really started back on August 15th. During a totally routine check, mechanics found some metal chips in the right engine's oil system. That's a very bad sign. By the 17th, the decision was made. They had to replace the engine. So the mechanics got to work at midnight under this incredibly tight deadline to get the plane ready for its next flight. And then on August 24th, Flight 236 took off, with no one having any idea about the fatal flaw hiding inside its new engine. So what was this flaw? Honestly, think of it like trying to use the wrong charger for your phone. You know, it might look similar, it might even seem to fit, but eventually something is going to go very wrong. The replacement Rolls-Royce engine was an older design, but it was being installed into the plane's newer system. The critical error was that a new hydraulic pump was installed on this older engine, but with a mix of old and new tubes that were never designed to fit together. You might be asking, how could this even happen? Well, it was just a cascade of failures. First, the new pump just wouldn't fit right because a fuel tube was in the way. The lead tech tried to look up the official Rolls-Royce manual on 3 different computers, but the network was down. What he didn't know was that the very same manual was on CDs right there in the same building. So under all this pressure, he took a shortcut. He just mixed and matched parts to make it fit. And the result of that shortcut was a fatal problem. 2 metal tubes, a fuel line and a hydraulic line that were never, ever supposed to touch, were now installed just millimeters apart. So with every single flight, the engine's vibrations caused them to rub against each other. Slowly, invisibly, just grinding away at the wall of that fuel line. A time bomb was now ticking. Now, that mechanical flaw was bad enough on its own, but it was about to be made so much worse by a critical human error up in the cockpit. So let's get back to the flight in progress. This is part 3, the point of no return. At 5:33 in the morning, almost 5 hours into the flight, the first sign of trouble finally appears. A fuel imbalance warning flashes in the cockpit. This meant the fuel in the right wing tank was way lower than the left, but the pilots just dismissed it. They figured it was just another common computer glitch. Save for a fuel imbalance, there's a standard procedure. You pull out the checklist, you follow the steps. But they didn't do that. They did the whole procedure from memory. And in doing so, they missed a crucial instruction right there in the Airbus checklist. If a fuel leak is suspected, follow the fuel leak procedure. Because they just assumed it was a computer error, not a real leak, they didn't follow the correct procedure.
Instead, they did the exact opposite of what they were supposed to do. They opened the crossfeed valve, which started pumping all the good fuel from the healthy tank directly into the leaking engine. They were literally feeding the leak and doubling the rate they were losing fuel.
And what's truly shocking here is that this exact scenario had happened before. In 1997, an Air France A320 had a very similar incident. After that, French authorities recommended that Airbus install an automated fuel leak warning system to prevent this specific mistake. But Airbus just amended its procedures on paper. The warning system was never installed. So 4 years later, the crew of Flight 236 flew right into the exact same trap, totally blind to the real problem.
So with all the fuel gone and both engines silent, we've arrived at the climax. This is part 4, the miracle landing, and it's one of the greatest feats of airmanship in history. From the moment that second engine died, Flight 236 glided for 144 kilometers. That's about 90 miles. To this day, that remains the longest powerless glide of a commercial jetliner in history. It's just an unbelievable achievement for what was, by then, a 200-ton glider. So at 6:26 a.m., they lost all power. 5 minutes later, they finally make radio contact with Lajes Air Base in the Azores. At 6:36 a.m., a moment of pure hope. They spot the runway lights in the darkness. They've only got one chance at this, no go-arounds. And then, at 6:45 a.m., after 19 of the most harrowing, silent minutes imaginable, they touch down. Captain Robert Pichet was instantly hailed as a hero around the world. But the story's human element took another strange turn just days later. A media storm blew up when his past was revealed. Years earlier, he had actually served prison time for smuggling. Now, while the news raised a lot of questions, for the 305 people whose lives he saved, he was, and remains, a hero. So what happened after the landing? Well, Air Transat got hit with the largest fine in Canadian aviation history at the time. The passengers, who were deeply traumatized, filed a $30 million class action lawsuit. But despite all the errors that led to the crisis, the captain and the crew were hailed as heroes for doing the impossible and saving all 306 lives. When you really look at it, this disaster wasn't caused by just one single failure, but a whole chain of them. You had an incorrect part supplied, a mechanic taking a shortcut, a service manual that was never read, the flight crew not using their checklist, and a recommended safety system that was never installed. It's a textbook example of what's called the Swiss cheese model of accidents. Each error is like a hole in a slice of cheese. And on that day, all the holes just happened to line up perfectly. A mistake of a few millimeters, a checklist that was ignored, a manual that went unread. These tiny little errors almost doomed 306 people. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the small, unseen checks and the forgotten procedures that are protecting us in our own lives?